Hello, welcome back to the third screencast on lesson planning. And before we move on, I really want to focus on something that I didn't get a chance to say. What we want is for your lesson plan to be more focused on uh, finding ways to get students to be active in learning. And so I find that I have to say this more with the secondary teachers than with the multiple subjects teachers, whom those teachers really seem to understand that it's all about getting kids active and moving, maybe because they think it's more arts and craftsy. But high school teachers think that, well, we're just a step away from college, and so therefore we should be doing a lot more lecturing and getting students to be taking notes, um, copying, and doing all of that stuff. So more direct instruction, more the traditional passive way of learning. So if you come from that school of thought, my suggestion, my polite warning for you is to start transforming that thinking to something where you want students to be more active. Um, Many of you are placed at schools where there's that greater opportunity for students to be active. High Tech High and others, Kearney, the kids are more likely to be engaged in activities rather than just listening to lectures. So lesson planning is moving. There's this transformation that's happening in education where people are recognizing, even at the college level, that you cannot just have students taking notes and listening to professors teach or to an expert teach or lecture, that instead there has to be much more um, interaction, more active learning. So given that that's what we want you to do, is to plan for that kind of activity to happen in your classroom, the question may be, well, how do you do it? How to do it? So over here, the steps are kind of in this fashion. Plan backwards. That is what I am going to be encouraging you to do, is when you plan, when you engage in lesson planning, you start from the end and you figure out what it is that you want your students to be able to do. And then once you've done that, you identify the thinking that students are going to need to produce the product that you want. Then once you have an understanding of what that thinking is, you design activities that develop those thinking. So recall back to that slide where the activity and students' thinking are equal. So that's what you're doing. Identify the thinking and then design activities that develop those thinking skills. And then you just provide opportunities for students to practice. So over here, I'm going to give you a kind of a brief example, and I know you all have different um, um, content areas, so I'm just focusing on one content area that I think we all can relate to. So start with identifying what your unit or daily assessment is. If you have a unit assessment, try to figure that out. And then figure out what your daily assessment is. My belief is that every day when you come to class, you should have a daily assessment. There should be something that you want students to be able to do. So once you've identified that, you analyze those assessments, and you're analyzing for what those thinking skills are that students need to do to be able to do well on that assessment. In other words, you're kind of teaching to the test. What is the test? What do students need to do to be able to do well on the test? You're identifying them. So for example, maybe you're an English teacher and you want students to be able to write, or a history teacher, could be both, or you're working in an interdisciplinary way with the English and history teacher on having students be able to write a persuasive argument essay about the cause of World War II. So it should be a persuasive argument essay about World War II. That's the actual specifics. But now you got to look at it and say, okay, what are the thinking skills associated with this? So what are they? Well, here are what I think they could be. The thinkings could be, maybe I want them to be able to define ethos, pathos, or logos, because ultimately I want them to write an essay that maybe uses one or more of those um, argumentative techniques. List the pros, list the cons, generate an argument, list examples to support the argument, list examples that counter the argument. Use these methods to making an argument. Write an essay, review writing, revise essays. So these might be some thinking skills that you want to do. So, so let's say I want to focus on this top one. Oh, wait, before I go on. When you identify all of the thinking skills, I am not suggesting that all of your students need all of these skills. It may be such that some of your students can do all of these things already, in which case maybe you want to add on. Maybe you want them to be much more sophisticated in their ability to write an argumentative paper. But probably that some of your students can't do some of these things. So if they can't do some of these things, maybe it's a new unit and they really aren't very good at doing any of these things. So maybe you need to start and create activities that address all of these things. But if they know how to do all of these, for example, the first 5, but they can't do the next ones very well, then focus on these. But if they can't do any of these, then you need to start from the beginning. So this is where your understanding of who your students are, knowing what their needs are, and then designing activities that facilitate those needs. More than likely in a class, you're going to have some students that can do some and other students that can do others. So this is where differentiated instruction will come into play. So maybe you're going to have some students work on defining ethos, pathos, and logos, while other students can start writing their essay and refining it and revising it. You have to figure out how you're going to differentiate instruction accordingly. Okay? So if I were to, let's say that this is a new unit and none of my students are very good or have the skills, know anything about pathos or ethos or logos, so maybe I want to start there. So here are some activities that I've created to meet that particular skill of being able to define pathos, ethos, and logos. So students make posters with definitions of pathos, ethos, and logos. And students generate examples of pathos, ethos, and logos. And students will generate ways to spot an ethos, pathos, or logos argument. So how do you know when you read something whether or not this is an ethos argument, or pathos argument, or logos argument? So I may create a series of activities that would do that. And it may take me maybe 1 day, maybe 2 days, maybe 3 days, depending on who your students are. But the goal is to get them doing this and providing opportunities for them to think. And that's the last little stage, is you want to provide opportunities for students to think. So when, let's say with the designing the posters, you want to review the posters and you want to provide feedback so that students can learn whether or not they're on the right track. With all of this, you want to provide feedback. You want to see what they can do and provide feedback. Tickets out the door is a nice way to kind of see what students are able to do and provide feedback. And you're providing opportunities for them to learn. Let me just stop here and say this is an important element of the EdTPA. So there are 3 parts to the EdTPA: the planning, the instruction, and the assessment. With the assessment, they want to see that you are providing feedback and you're encouraging students to use that feedback. So this idea of backwards planning and planning that meets the needs of students' thinking and learning needs is really a part of the EdTPA. So when you start thinking about your activities and how it fits with what students can do, then you're more in line with what current ideas about what effective teaching is about. All right, I'm going to stop here and then we'll finish up with the screencast. Oh, I think I have 2 more. Okay, so I'm going to end here.